勝負のつかない技の出し合いとか永遠したりしてね。ドラゴンボール Z カカロット。
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are going back to Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Yes, what a retro game this one is. Look, I got the itch at the most opportune time. I was thinking a lot about Kakarot and how I wanted to go play the Trunks DLC, so I started to look into that a bit, and I found out, oh, the Bardock DLC is coming out on January 13th, and next-gen update as well. So I bided my time. I dove into the Trunks DLC first, then the next-gen update hit. I dove into the Bardock DLC. I played a lot of the base game again, and I have so many thoughts to share with you today because DBZ Kakarot, while it's not my favorite Dragon Ball game, there's so much stuff it gets right. I also have just a fond memory tied to it. It was actually the last midnight release I went to ahead of the pandemic, so I remember just reflecting on that moment a ton as we were all locked inside in those initial stages. So I just have a lot of memories tied to this game, but it wasn't perfect, and we'll go into that a bit in this video. But I remember just being so excited ahead of launch. Dragon Ball Z, it's an RPG, CyberConnect at the helm, right? Developers of Ultimate Ninja Storm. You're speaking my language here. Let's see what you got. So let us see indeed. If you're new here, you're into retrospective nostalgia content, or honestly DBZ, because we do a lot of that here, consider subscribing. With that, yes, really, the complete in-box experience for your 2020 video game. So I love this cover art because there's actually a card tied to it. It is from the Dragon Ball Super card game. We'll put it on screen now. I sent in a bunch of those to get graded at the PSA, so unfortunately I don't have them with me, but I used to play the DBS card game a ton, so it came with this game. I was stoked about that. Anyway, back of the box, it says, relive the Dragon Ball Z saga. From the arrival of Raditz to the final fight against Buu, play as several Z warriors in this action RPG adventure, enjoy a lot of activities, mini-games, side quests, and train for intense boss fights. And you can see like Vegeta fishing, Goku eating, driving around a little bit, some baseball. That was the thing that I think really put this game over the top. We've heard action RPG before. I mean, we covered the entire Legacy of Goku series here on this channel. Action RPG is a Dragon Ball thing. It's been a thing in a ton of those games. And really the only turn-based ones that come to mind are Dragon Ball Fusions on the 3DS, as well as Dragon Ball Z Attack of the Saiyans on DS, which I have yet to play, but I want to get to. Those are the more traditional role-playing games. These are action RPGs. Now, the inside of this complete in-box experience, you ready for this? This is about to be a good one. Oh, modern gaming, you did it again. So that's what you get in a complete in-box copy of DBZ Kakarot, I guess. Let's talk more importantly about the game. To my surprise, the support for this game has only ramped up as we've gone further away from launch. They added a card game to DBZ Kakarot, not the card game I was referring to earlier, being the Dragon Ball Super card game, which they are actually now finally doing an online client for. I played that game for 5 years, analog style as in person, and I miss it dearly because my local scene died. So I'm very excited for that. But what they added into DBZ Kakarot is actually called Card Warriors, and it is a very fun game, but their way of bringing into the game was very obtuse. There were so many loading screens. The menus took forever to go from one to the next. The scene was relatively dead because they launched it so far from launch, and it was like the first major piece of DLC. And honestly, the offline component was not compelling. Worst case, though, was initially you could not invite your friends in. So me and my friend both downloaded Kakarot at the same time when they dropped this update. We said, let's play this together for a couple of nights. And you'd think the basic feature of inviting your friend to a private match would be a thing. It was not. But this is something that's been added to the game. So now when you're running around the overworld, you'll actually find little terminals all over, like some in West City, for example, and you can go into them, and that immersion factor is there because it'll carry you then into Card Warriors. I like that kind of stuff because it builds off of the mini game factor that this title has. Now, when it comes to the overall calling card for the game, I'd say it was the open world, right? The presentation here was fantastic. You can say what you will about CyberConnect when it comes to their lack of depth, and probably I would agree with you that they really don't go all in on systems and true character depth, but they know how to capture anime. And my oh my, did they do that well here in Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. So you can fly around the overworld, and what I love is being able to see up close and personal some of my favorite locations like West City. But I feel like for every good thing I have to say about Kakarot, there is kind of a nagging point to it that I have to address. Like, I love flying around the overworld in Kakarot. I don't love that there's very minimal interaction. Like, I wish there were more side quests. I wish there were more things to do, places to go inside. You see, that's what we loved about Legacy of Goku 2. It's like going inside Goku's house, interacting with the objects in there, which, by the way, you can do in Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Many times you can go in there. And it felt like an upgrade in that sense where it's like, oh, I'm seeing this all in high definition, next gen greatness. Okay, beautiful. But more of that is what I was expecting in Kakarot. And a lot of its interactions in the world felt surface level, unfortunately. I think it makes up for it in a lot of its presentation, its effects, its animations especially will go all in on. But unfortunately, I found the world to just sort of be this host to where you would fight and nothing more. But it did make the world of Dragon Ball feel a bit more cohesive, as you could go to an overall world map and see all these different segments, because it is a little unfair for me to call it a open world game, I suppose. Like, they're more like open zones split into a bunch of areas rather than one connective open world. But the way the map's laid out, there is this connective tissue, if you will, where you can feel where each area is. And given that they were broken up like that, again, I feel like it pretty much begs to be a little more interactive. But those initial steps are great, and I hope they continue to build off that framework, because things like going around, fishing, one of the most raw fishing mini games of all time, not because of what you're doing, but because when you yank this gigantic dinosaur out of the lake, you don't just catch it, you kick it in the dang head and knock it the heck out on the dock behind you and do an epic pose afterwards. Like, what's up? Just knocked out a fish. What are you going to do about it? I like that kind of energy. You go from that to cooking. The cooking gives you buffs. The baseball mini game is just really fun, especially because you think of the Dragon Ball Super episode where there was that baseball game against all of the Z Warriors, and they redid the Yamcha craters shot again. I love that episode so much. So it felt like they were really leaning into the fan servicey nature of the game while also giving it depth in those areas. I really appreciated that kind of stuff. So while I thought some of the exploration was surface level, there are some unique defining mechanics here that made me love Kakarot overall. Now, the combat, as you would expect in something like a CyberConnect game, oh my God, does it look so good. And it feels great a lot of the time. What I recognize going back to this is, I always thought that Dragon Ball Z Kakarot's combat was okay. Like, on the depth chart of mechanics, was it great? Probably not, but man, does it feel good. Especially now with this next-gen update. When I was playing the Bardock DLC, when I had the 60 FPS rolling, I was like, when you're mashing the X button, I'm just zipping all over the place, and you hear the sound effects and everything, they capture every minute detail, where even though you're just hitting the circle button and then hitting a super attack, it almost doesn't matter for a moment. You're like, yeah, I would love some more thoughtful combos, thoughtful enemy design, but this captures the energy of this IP that means so much to me. I almost don't care. But part of me really does, because if I think to myself, wow, if they had a whole combo system, and beyond the combo system, they had enemies that demanded these combos, and it could be as complex as DMC5, or it could be as simple as Marvel Ultimate Alliance, I wouldn't care. Just some type of combo system to exploit weaknesses of enemies would go such a long way in Kakarot. And while I know the implementation of certain mechanics isn't easy, as a player, it's one of those things that you think of and you go, well, why isn't this here? And I think for game designers, that should be their first thought beyond even us. But the combat looks so good. Like, I remember when I was playing the Trunks DLC, and when you charge up all of your energy and you enter that Super Saiyan mode, the camera shots they use for combo finishers, the style where they take iconic shots like Trunks going under his arm like this, the way they mesh that into combos, you just see iconic moment after iconic moment. It really lights my fire. So there is something special there in the animation quality. And that's doubly so for the cutscenes. The cutscenes in Kakarot are just put your feet up, take out your bowl of popcorn, get cozy. This is peak fiction. Dragon Ball Z is a lot of things. You could argue for its time, the animation was great. I would disagree. I think like One Piece was like the shonen king of animation around that time. Just as someone who's watching all of that old stuff now, I'm continuously impressed on how well animated it is in certain parts. But Dragon Ball, you know, I just don't think it's ever been the king of animation until those movies started roll around. Now I'm like, oh, now they're setting the standard. That's what we want out of Dragon Ball. But back then, not so much. You had to use your imagination for some of the fights. Outside of the Android 17 Piccolo fight, that one was so sick. So point being though is I think the animation wasn't fantastic for the most part. You could argue whether or not it was great for its time, but hindsight 2020, what I love about Kakarot is that they pretty much remaster these scenes, like Majin Vegeta's moment during the Buu saga where he sacrifices himself. Epic! Epic, man. Or of course, Gohan versus Cell. Oh my word. And more importantly, speaking of the Cell saga, the Trunks DLC gets into all of that. What I love about the Trunks DLC is they go even beyond the Cell saga. You actually get to see something that's exclusive to the manga of Dragon Ball Z, which was how did Trunks handle the Buu arc himself, and how did that go? And it plays out completely differently from what happened in Dragon Ball Z, and I think that is awesome to see overall. So the way they've played with this content and even given us new stuff that we haven't seen before, like that's what I wanted more out of Kakarot. Like these remastered cutscenes are so epic. Again, it goes back to what I said about the combat. It represents the thing you love so well. You almost don't care that you've seen it a million times before. One thing we talk about when we did our Remembering the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games or Budokai Tenkaichi is like, how many times can I go into the story of Dragon Ball Z? That's why I think Xenoverse was like a spiritual awakening for all of us. It said, it was right on the nose. Hey, this thing that you know and love and you're very familiar with, guess what? Or flipping it on its head now. It's like, there we go. Yes, that's what I wanted. And I love the story for Xenoverse 1. Like Mira, Toa, great characters. Love, love, love that. But again, it goes back to cutscene quality. Cutscene quality in Kakarot, you know, you may be looking at a familiar scene, but it makes you realize if they had today's technology when they made those shots, just how great it would have been already. I mean, it was fantastic back then, but even more so. So yeah, I think presentation is this game's best friend. Now, I talked a bit about the Trunks DLC. To get into that a little bit, that was sort of my warm-up phase. Like I dove into the base game, into Trunks, then back into the base game until Bardock came out and then into that. So the Trunks DLC was a lot of fun. Now, I love the Android arc. Like that is, oh my God, it's so good, dude. Like it's such great Dragon Ball content. Like there's such high stakes. I feel like everyone has a moment. It's so good. And so to capture what is my favorite Dragon Ball character, Trunks, and all of that as the Warrior of Hope is fantastic. What I'll warn you about is with all these DLC, Bardock, Trunks, you have these highlight moments in your head from the movies or whatever. And then you gotta play the lead up to it. You'll recognize, you know, they took their time with some things getting there. There are some new mechanics in the Bardock one I'm excited to get into, but when it comes to Trunks, it is more of the same. So if you are diving back into Kakarot, like Trunks is a good primer to getting into the new stuff with Bardock. I personally loved it nonetheless because the cutscenes in this DLC are so fire. Like Gohan sacrificing himself. They actually had a moment where he fought back a little bit. So little twists like that, if you've seen the movie or you've seen the show, etc., you appreciate that level of detail, that little addition here and there. But when it comes to the Bardock DLC, that's what I'm more keen on getting into because now you're starting to see the new stuff. And this is a part of Season Pass 2. Season Pass 2, I gotta say, man, I'm a little excited to see what they got cooking. The rumor is right now we're gonna go back to OG Dragon Ball for the next expansion, and that's exciting. But what I love about Bardock is you actually get to explore Planet Vegeta. Now, the problem I had at the start of this video, seeing that he creates his videos to come full circle, the problem I had at the beginning is relevant here. Like, you're on Planet Vegeta, you're there, living, breathing the planet of the Saiyans, and the interaction is just the same minimal stuff that you saw on the base game. And that's unfortunate. But here's where they kind of make up for it, right? So as you start getting deeper in the Bardock DLC, they introduce what's called annihilation events. So for those who don't know much about the Dragon Ball lore, originally the Saiyans were pretty much mercenaries hired and taken over by Frieza. And if they didn't do Frieza's bidding, goodbye, Planet Vegeta, which we know how that one ends. And so Bardock starts off, kind of as a villain, if you will. He's very cold and ruthless, and the annihilation events are you going through these planets and destroying them. And it's awesome because you play every Dragon Ball game as Mr. Do-Gooder himself. And don't get me wrong, got a lot of love for my man Goku, but you always play as this dude. And one thing I love about Kakarot in general is it should be called Dragon Ball Z Gohan, because you mostly play as Gohan. But point being is you always are playing as the good guy. In Bardock, I know he eventually turns into the good guy with a lot of Saiyan pride, but he is ruthless at the start, and they tied a mechanic to that. So what happens is you'll fly around these worlds and you'll fight bases of enemies and do these annihilation events. Now, as you beat up enemies and you use your support meter, you'll build up what's called a Z combo, which when you pull, you will eliminate a horde of enemies in this epic cutscene as you see the counter just roll up, and then they sometimes drop a boss enemy in there. What I'll say about Bardock as I jump back into Trunks a little bit is Bardock was much better on the balance end of things. When it came to Trunks and its DLC, I found that it was incredibly tough. Now, I like what they were going for here because I think they were trying to represent the struggle Trunks went through with the gameplay, where even after leveling up, I found myself, wow, I'm still like really fighting these spongy bosses. This is crazy. And eventually, by the time you get to the end of it and you really start doing heavy damage, it feels pretty good. Like Trunks has truly ascended past Android 17, past Android 18, past Cell. That feels great. But getting there, you got some long, spongy fights. When it comes to Bardock, what I actually really liked about it was that wasn't the case. Like Bardock actually had good balancing. Like some enemies had more health when it was reasonable, but for the most part, Bardock was an expansion where you were the powerful Saiyan, wiping out these planets, beating up the baddies, or the goodies, and it felt great. So I gotta commend them for kind of adjusting on the fly here, and I gotta imagine it was intent of design. I think it didn't play out maybe as well as they had hoped with Trunks. I don't think making him a little more powerful just for the sake of flow would have been a bad thing, but I get what they were going for, and for some, I think they're going to appreciate it. But when it comes to Bardock, they just crank it up. And what I will say is Bardock actually has some pretty cool side quests. The side quests in Kakarot overall are kind of filler. Again, you're just looking for more interaction. And so you get moments in Kakarot, like the base game, you meet Android 8. That's an awesome moment, right? Great callback there. In the case of Bardock, there is a side quest where you find the Frieza Force on Planet Vegeta. And you start to see Bardock and Tora and everyone else in the Bardock squad start going through it thinking like, why is the Frieza Force here on Planet Vegeta? Is it really? No, I doubt it. And they kind of move along, but you as the player, as the viewer, are like, oh, I like that. So they play with the source material pretty well there. Better than I'd say they did with the base game. And that makes sense. You have like a smaller area to work with, so they just expand in more meaningful ways in a lesser amount where they're not spread as thin across a full AAA semi-open world video game. But Kakarot in 2023, I think it's definitely worth the look if you're a big DBZ fan. You gotta just accept like there's not gonna be depth here. You're not gonna get the true Dragon Ball RPG that it was kind of marketed as. You gotta accept that some of the interaction is surface layer. And you also gotta realize that Gohan should be on the cover of this game. But beyond that, there's a lot of fan service here. The cutscenes are fantastic. The battles feel pretty good. The support system is pretty good. I mean, there's a lot here to love and still love. I remember I soured on Kakarot a little bit over time, but I have the Platinum Trophy for this game. What I will say, this is important, this is a reward for those of you who sat this long through the video. You should fire this up, download the next gen update, launch the PS5 version if you have yet to, free Platinum Trophy. Your boy got number 38 now. How about them apples? So that's my tip to you. But anyway, Kakarot, still great. Give it a look. Let me know your thoughts on it down below. Looking forward to seeing what you have to say. Other than that, take fantastic care of yourselves, and I'll see you around in the next video. Peace out.